This vaccine is elos y pono din y for opic but toss. Like so the link to the video will be the discipline on below. Go and check them out. So let's into this vaccine 3, 2, 1. Oh. Wow.
Noah got the call at 6:14 a.m. on a Thursday while he was still in bed.
Yeah.
The kind of call that arrives before the world is fully awake because bad news has no sense of timing. Marco had been driving home from a night shift when a truck ran a red light on Belmore Street and removed him from Noah's life in approximately 4 seconds.
Wow. Rest in peace. Wow.
He was 32 years old and had kissed Noah goodbye at 11 p.m. the night before and said he would be home by 6. He was home by 6, just not the way either of them had planned.
Yeah.
Noah did not cry at the hospital. He did not cry at the identification, or the paperwork, or the drive home, or the 3 days that followed where people filled his apartment with food he didn't eat and words he couldn't hear. He cried for the first time on day 4 when he found Marco's coffee cup still in the sink unwashed. He slid down against the kitchen cabinet and stayed there for a very long time. The grief was total. It had no edges and no floor. Noah moved through the following weeks like a man underwater, present enough to function, absent enough that nobody could quite reach him. At 6 weeks, he started feeling unwell. He assumed it was grief. Grief does extraordinary things to a body, and he had enough of it to explain almost anything. At 8 weeks, his colleague pulled him aside after a meeting and said quietly that he didn't look right and should see a doctor. Noah said he was fine in the specific tone people use when they are the furthest thing from fine. He went to the doctor on a Friday afternoon, mostly to stop people worrying about him. He left the doctor's office standing very still on the pavement outside for 11 minutes before he could make himself move. Pregnant. 7 weeks.
Wow. Congrats. Yeah.
The world tilted completely on its axis, and Noah stood in the middle of the pavement with people moving around him and understood that the last piece of Marco still existed. Inside him. Growing.
Literally. Yeah.
Completely unaware that its other father was gone. He drove home and sat in the apartment surrounded by Marco's things. His jacket still on the hook. His books still stacked beside the couch. His handwriting still on the notepad by the phone, and pressed both hands flat against his stomach. Nothing felt real except that. The pregnancy was not easy. Grief and a growing body do not coexist gently, and Noah's was proof of that.
Really?
The exhaustion was crushing, the nausea relentless, the nights long and loud with absence.
It's getting harder every day without you, but the baby is doing well. I hope you know how much I love you.
He talked to Marco every night, out loud in the dark, one hand on his slowly growing belly, telling him everything. What the doctor said, how the baby moved, how terrifying and extraordinary it was to be doing this completely alone. He was not entirely alone. Marco's sister Lucia arrived from Milan at 10 weeks with 2 suitcases and an expression that said she was not leaving until she was
Yep, that's a baby bump.
ready, and Noah could say absolutely nothing about it. She was right. She filled the apartment with noise and food and the specific kind of love that demands nothing and gives everything, and Noah understood for the first time that he might actually survive this. At 16 weeks, he felt the first movement. He was lying in bed at 2 a.m. unable to sleep, one hand on his now visibly round belly. when something small and deliberate pushed back against his palm. He stopped breathing for a moment. Then he pressed his hand harder against the movement and felt it again. Small, certain, completely alive. And something in him that had been completely dark since 6:14 a.m. on a Thursday morning turned on again. Not fully, not all at once, but enough. The pregnancy transformed him slowly from the inside out. His body changed week by week, his belly growing full and round and undeniable. And with every change came something he hadn't expected. Not healing exactly, but purpose solid and stubborn and entirely Marco's.
Everything looks perfectly healthy on the scan, Noah. The heartbeat is strong.
That's wonderful news. When can
Really wonderful news.
At 32 weeks, he packed Marco's jacket away. Not because he was forgetting, because he needed the hook for the baby bag, and Marco, he decided, would have found that completely reasonable. Labor came 3 weeks early on a Sunday morning, without warning or mercy. Lucia drove him to the hospital at 4 a.m. doing speeds that would have terrified Noah under any other circumstances, but felt completely appropriate given
You can do it. You can do it. Come on. You can do it. Yeah.
the situation. The contractions were savage and relentless,
Hey, you can do it. Come on. You can do it.
and Noah endured them with the specific ferocity of a man who had already survived the
You can do it.
worst thing imaginable and refused to be broken by anything again. Lucia held his hand through every hour of it. She cried enough for both of them, which freed Noah to focus entirely on the monumental task of
You can do it.
bringing the last piece of her brother
You can do it.
into the world. At 9:47 a.m. on a Sunday morning, after 11 hours that tested
You can do it. Come
every
on.
limit
You can do
Noah
it.
had, a cry filled the delivery room.
Oh.
Sharp, furious, completely certain of itself. A boy, dark hair, Marco's nose, Noah's eyes. Noah held his son against his chest and shook from somewhere so deep inside himself that it had no name. Lucia pressed her face against the doorframe and wept openly and without embarrassment, because some moments are too large for composure.
Literally.
He named him Mateo Marco, after his father,
Mateo
obviously.
Marco.
After the man who drove home on a Thursday morning and never arrived and somehow, impossibly, still did.
Yeah. Wow.
Mateo grew up knowing everything. Noah never hid a single thing from him. Not the accident, not the grief, not the extraordinary and heartbreaking miracle of his own existence. He grew up knowing that his father had loved his other father so completely that the love left something behind even after he was gone. He grew up knowing that a heartbeat is not just biological.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is the universe refusing to let something end.
Yeah.
Sometimes it arrives at 7 weeks, in a doctor's office, in the body of a man who thought he had already lost everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is enough to bring someone back from the dark. Not all the way, not perfectly, but back.
Cool.
That was enough. That was more than enough.
Yeah. Oh. Det var sån illogic porno thing for I opened, but that got tossed. The link to the video will be the description below. Go and check them out. So drop a like if you like and comment below if you want to see more reaction like this one, and subscribe if you're new, and click the bell so you can be notified me below in the post and go live in my bye. Wow.